Greetings, my name is Charles McCall and I'm Director of Mentoring Growing Leaders. And we're now at lesson number 5 in a 13-part lesson of short 5-minute videos. 5 minutes, give or take a little bit. Thank you for your patience and understanding. And we're looking at the subject of, does God cause calamity and disaster? With the subtitle, Understanding the Ways of God. We've looked that God is ruler and sovereign over nature. God is sovereign over plant and animal life. God is sovereign over nations. And this lesson, we're looking that God is sovereign over each person's existence. What this means is that the God of the universe has a plan. Events that happen in history are not haphazard, they're not by accident, but God is working behind the scenes. He's working in the details of history, and He's influencing people to accomplish His will. One limitation that God has is He does work through people. And so God works through me, and He works through you, He works through nature, He works through circumstances, and He has a purpose and He has a plan for mankind. And He has been over the centuries, step by step, working out that plan. And God has created natural forces to work in the universe, and He has given mankind a free will to decide what they want to do. But there are times when God will intervene, when God will step onto the scene, He will step onto the stage, and He will either directly influence nature, plants, animals, nations, or even people, or He will allow nature or people or nations to do what they want to do, but He will guide it to end up where He wants it. And so again, I'm going to be explaining that a lot more in detail as we get further into these lessons, but this lesson is on God's sovereignty over each person's existence. I'm just letting the Bible, we're using the Bible to guide us, and so I'm just reading a lot of Bible verses. I'm giving a few comments, and we're letting it rest at that. Psalms 139, verse 16. God says, King David says, "Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." This verse tells us that God sees us in our mother's womb, and God prepared a future for us. This is what is so wonderful and so exciting. God prepared a future for us before we were born. John chapter 21, verse 19, Jesus said this to Peter, about Peter, indicating the kind of death by which Peter would die and glorify God. Then He said to him, "Follow me." And so Jesus knew how Peter would die. He knew how John would die. He knew how Paul and his 12 disciples, Jesus knew how they would die because He had a story for them. And so He was able to tell Peter how he would die before Peter experienced that death. Exodus chapter 12, verse 36. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people of Israel, and they gave them what they asked for, so they plundered the Egyptians. God's plan was to move Israel out of bondage in Egypt, to set them free and bring them back to their homeland, the land that God had promised to their forefather Abraham. The Egyptians didn't want anything to do with it, but God worked in the thinking of the Egyptians. He allowed the Egyptians to make up their own mind, but He put His idea and He arranged the circumstances to not only let them go, but to give them whatever they needed. And so God did not force the Egyptians to do anything, but God worked in the lives of those people, those Egyptian people, that when the Israelites came and say, "By the way, do you have $100 that I could have? Do you have, a certain amount of gold or whatever I need?" God worked in them. He did not force them, but God worked in their hearts and their minds and their thinking and their circumstances for them to say, "Yeah, sure, go ahead and take it." Proverbs 16:33. The lot is cast into the lap, but every decision is from the Lord. And so what that means is that you and I can make whatever decisions we want, but we always need to consider, Lord, we want done what you want done. We want to invite you, Lord, into our circumstances, to change things, to rearrange things, to prepare things, because, Lord, the final decision is up to you. You see, God knew you before you were born. God knew what your physical frame would be like. He knew the color of your hair, the color of your eyes, your height, your physical weaknesses and strengths. Because of his, what we call omniscience, because he knows everything, he knows your future. He has a path which he desires for you to walk in. In fact, the Bible seems to indicate that God has a book of your life, that he's written the script for your life, for you to walk in, which includes his perfect plan for you. And he knows how you will respond to that perfect plan. The Bible teaches that there are no accidents with God. He is sovereign over each person's birth, career, and death, and he's sovereign over our successes and our failures. It doesn't mean that he causes them. It doesn't mean that God causes any of this, but he's sovereign over it. It means that God can orchestrate and arrange for circumstances, for things to be a certain way at a certain time, for us to be in the right place at the right time and do what he wants us to do, what he had planned for us to do before we were born. He's sovereign over our successes and failures. Even if we choose to do wrong, God can turn it around for our good. God may not cause these things to happen, but he can use them to turn out for our good. There's a verse in Romans chapter 8, verse 28. It says that we know that all things, that God will cause all things to work out for the good for those who loved him and those who are called according to his purpose. God works all things out for our good. And so this is how God works. Even if we choose wrong, God can change our wrong to turn out good for us. And if we take the wrong way, even if a nation or a person or a group of people, God can, if God chooses, he can intervene and not force anybody to do anything, but he can influence our lives and our circumstances so that it all turns out for our good. Take, for example, the king of Persia. In Esther chapter 6, verse 1, the king of Persia couldn't sleep at night. And so he called one of his scribes over. He said, read to me, because I know I'm going to fall asleep if I read, if somebody reads something to me. And so they started reading the history of his nation. And they came to a place where it talked about a guy named Mordecai. And Mordecai had done a great thing for the nation, but he had never received a reward. And so the king gave Mordecai a reward. He raised him to a high stature. It ended up saving all of Israel from punishment, from death. And so while God did not violate the free will of that king, he did not violate the decision that that king was going to make, God moved upon that scribe to open up the page to that specific point in history at that time so that the king would hear it, he would read it, and he chose himself to make the decision that ended up coinciding exactly with God's will. And so we probably went a little bit over 5 minutes in this video, but I want you to look at the screen now. You're going to see my email address, my Facebook page, my blog, and my LinkedIn. You're welcome to contact me. I have many lessons. I can give you this lesson in PDF form. I can give you all of my slides in JPEG form or PowerPoint form. I have so many slides, so many lessons on so many subjects. I am happy to give them to you free of charge, but I'd like for one thing for you to do. I'd like for you to subscribe to this channel. I'd like for you to like this video and click the bell button so that you're notified the next time that I upload a video. And if this is interesting to you and if it's helpful to you, I'd like for you to share the link with others so it can be beneficial and helpful to them as well. Thank you so very much.